So what is existentialism? At least according to Gray, he says it consists of a mood and a metaphysics. Now, where the mood ends and the metaphysics begins, I don't think it's quite clear. But as far as the mood, he says at the bottom of page 114, the mood can perhaps best be identified as a feeling of the homelessness of man. This world into which we come or are thrown as human creatures is radically insufficient to the claims and requirements of the spirit. Now that really seems completely arbitrary in a way. I mean, is that really true? Why is it true? Well, what is so insufficient about the world? But if you look at the end of that paragraph, which is on page 115, this might help. He says, any order and meaning, if there are to be any, must be created by individual effort and resolve, and created anew by each individual all the time. Now, it's a very famous essay by another existentialist philosopher, French thinker named Jean-Paul Sartre, where he defined existentialism as existence preceding essence, which pretty much boils down to a statement that we simply exist in the world, and we have no definitive nature or essence that would guide us in how to live, what to find meaningful, what's right and wrong, questions like that. That we sort of look out into the world and we don't get any help for those questions. There is no pre-established way to live, or right and wrong, or anything having value or not having, or anything having value. That those things have to be made up by the individual. They have to be supplied by our own acts of will, and that seems to be very similar to what the last quote is getting at. And there's some comparisons with other modernist moods. I mean, the idea of natural science, which is pretty much an atheist position, or at least a position that doesn't give a place within the natural order for God. The notion that the world as we find it is fairly meaningless, and that we are creatures who require meaning, and we don't really find it. So that accounts, I guess, for the feeling of alienation or homelessness, not being at home in the world. And that supposedly is the mood. Well, what's the metaphysics? Well, metaphysics here, let's take metaphysics to be our fundamental view of the nature of reality. The existentialist view, according to Gray, in contrast to the metaphysics of Spinoza that's very briefly mentioned at the beginning of the essay, the metaphysics of existentialism, again, is nothingness. Now, Spinoza believed that all was being. That's why we didn't have to worry about death, because we, and I think he meant we as mental substance or soul, never go out of existence, because nothing that truly is ever goes out of existence. So death is not something to worry about, because it's not real. The metaphysics, or the fundamental view of reality that Gray describes on pages 116, 117, is one in which nothingness plays a part. That is, the view of the reality is that reality is kind of like a gaping hole, like we look out in the world and there's a void. Now that isn't completely explained here, and how could it be in such a short essay? But he says, towards the bottom of page 116, if someone asks us what is troubling us when we are oppressed with this feeling of the uncanny, we are likely to answer, it is nothing. These words are truer than we know, for what has oppressed us is the primary intuition that we are not sustained by infinite power and plenitude of being, as so many philosophers have taught. On the contrary, we, human creatures, perceive dimly in the experience of the uncanny that the world rests on nothing. It has no basis or ground. Now, this seems to be a suggestion not only about being or what exists, but also specifically about God. That is, that the existentialist position seems to suggest that there is no God which sustains the world, which sustains us, and that we're alone in this world, we human beings. I mean, that is, there is no ultimate or infant consciousness to sustain us, to guide us. And this creates a view, as Karl Jaspers puts it, this is the bottom of the first paragraph on page 117, quote, "The bottomless character of the world must become revealed to us if we are to win through to the truth of the world." Now here we seem to be getting to the center of it, that is, that an acceptance of our true situation and a refusal to ignore it or to paper it over or to create stories to mask our true situation seems to be what the existentialists are calling for. And what is our true condition? Again, towards the bottom of page 117, Gray says, "Our true condition is one of exposure. In reality, we are defenseless, naked to the winds of chance and blind accident." And then he mentions this German term, Geborgenheit, which means being secure or safe. And what the existentialists seem to do is that although we have a natural disposition to seek this Geborgenheit, this safety or security, it's an illusion. We have none. We are exposed in the world. We are vulnerable creatures. We have neither physically or spiritually any kind of comfort zone that we can hide in. We're out there, and the acceptance of this is the acceptance of truth in the existentialist way of putting it. And we have different experiences, Jasper says, that reveal this truth most clearly to us, but the most important is death, or as he says on page 118, this is Gray in the next to last paragraph, the most extreme spiritual exposure is the exposure to death. Death belongs to the human situation as such and to the situation of each individual. And then toward the very end of page 118, you must gain a vivid realization of death as a constitutive part of life, not as a mere end of life. Death is a phenomenon within life. If it is taken into life in a personal way, it will affect a revolution in our behavior. So I think we're getting closer to what the message is here in terms of death and existentialism, and that is that the consciousness of our exposure to death, of our vulnerability, is absolutely essential in living in truth, as the phrase will come up. So in the next talk, we'll explore a little more about why that's so. Why is it so important to be aware of death, to be aware of our mortality, in order to live in truth and to be so-called genuine persons?